Men don't last long. We all know this, especially your girlfriend. But wars, they last quite a long time, and that makes your girlfriend jealous. However, chuds, I have found a battle that will make you feel not so alone in short length. In other words, I would like to welcome you to a new video, a new base battle of history, and to the Anglo-Zanzibar War. In 1698, the Sultanate of Oman took control of Zanzibar from the Portuguese, who love colonising. The Portuguese had claimed Zanzibar since 1499. Then, in 1858, Sultan Majid bin Said declared independence from Oman. Then, everyone's favourite coloniser came, the British Empire. And they recognised and enforced the Zanzibar independence. They wanted something. So what did the British want from this poor, newly independent country? It's quite reasonable. They just wanted Zanzibar to ban slavery because it was a major trafficking centre for slavery. So the second Sultan, Bargash bin Said, complied, and overall both nations had friendly relations. However, colonial powers are going to colonial power, and problems emerged. And everyone's favourite war starter, the Germans, had an issue. And this was because trade rights in Kenya had been granted to Britain, while Tanganyika granted theirs to Germans, and these two countries were really close neighbours. So, apart from the chud slave traders coping and seething about losing money because, no, you can't slave people anymore, this is the 1800s, the German colonial authorities were also getting the anger from Zanzibar due to the fact they were refusing to fly the Sultan's flag. This act of belligerence actually led to clashes between local populations and German troops stationed in Tanganyika. The clashes worsened, and during one such incident, German troops massacred 150 people in the coastal town of Bagamoyo. Sultan Khalifa, the third Sultan of Zanzibar, sent in troops to the mainland to restore order, which was successful, and the violence ended. Then, on the 1st of July 1890, Great Britain and Germany signed the Zanzibar Treaty, which divided the spheres of influences in East Africa. As part of the agreement, Germany gave up its claims to Zanzibar and the East African coast between Witu and the Juba River. In return, Britain recognised Germany's control over parts of the mainland East Africa, including areas stretching from Lake Victoria to Lake Tanganyika. This treaty also handed control over Heligoland, a small North Sea island Britain had controlled since 1814. This treaty reflected Germany's efforts to improve relations with Britain after abandoning its alliance with Russia under Bismarck. Sultan Ali bin Said ascended the throne in 1890 and immediately declared the Sultanate a British protectorate, giving the British the right to veto the appointment of sultans, and in 1893, Zanzibar appointed its fifth monarch, Sultan Hamad bin Tuani, who ruled Zanzibar for about 3 years. But on the 25th of August, 1896, he suddenly and unexpectedly died in his palace. Although the truth will never be known of how he actually died, it's not difficult to guess, and this is for the sole reason that within a few hours after dying, his cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, moved in and took up the job of Sultan without British approval. A few hours after he died, I would say it's safe to assume that Khalid killed his cousin, and the main consensus is that he was poisoned by Khalid, but there's no evidence for this apart from the glaring fucking he moved in 3 hours later after his cousin died. Moving on from this situation and the obvious assassination of his own cousin, the local British diplomats of the region weren't best pleased with this rip-off Game of Thrones episode, and Chief Diplomat Basil Cave, some name by the way, quickly declared that Khalid should stand down. Khalid, being the smart man he was, basically said, lol no, and started to build up his forces. This army was around 2,800 to 3,000 men, mostly made up of civilians, slaves, and servants armed with rifles and muskets. But in this Timu militia, 700 of the fighters were actually experienced Zanzibari Askari soldiers. Khalid's forces also had some artillery, a 17th century bronze cannon, somehow. I don't know why. 2 12-pounder field guns and maybe a Gatling gun. And all of these guns, including the fucking bronze cannon, was aimed at the harbour, at the British ships. The Sultan troops also took possession of the Zanzibari Navy, which consisted of one wooden ship, the HHS Glasgow, which was based on the British frigate, the Glasgow. So guys, don't worry, first 3 episodes and we still have Scotland mentioned. Soar Alba, guys, Soar Alba. Lloyd Matthews and Basil Cave also were mustering the forces in this situation. Already commanding 900 Zanzibari Askaris under Lieutenant Arthur Edward Harrington Rakes, the most British name ever, of the Wiltshire Regiment, who was seconded to the Zanzibar Army and held the rank of Brigadier General. 150 sailors and marines were brought in from the Pearl-class protected cruiser Philomel and the gunboat Thrush, or as I like to call it, the fungal boat. And these boats were anchored in the harbour. The naval contingent under Captain O'Callaghan came ashore with 15 minutes of being requested, which is quite fast for 150 men. Also, a smaller contingent of soldiers were also sent to protect the British consulate and nearby British civilians. After this, another gunboat entered the harbour called the HMS Sparrow and was also anchored off opposite of the palace. It's not looking good, Khalid bros. With this, Sultan Khalid tried to suck up to the US consul, asking for his recognition for his illegal ascension of power. But in layman's terms, no law, stand down, bro. At 2:30 PM, Khalid buried his cousin. Now bear in mind, he moved into his house, he took his old job and became Sultan of Zanzibar before burying his own cousin. Come on, man. At least have a bit of respect. His cousin was probably laying like face down in the kitchen, no, like the fucking like living room. And he went, may as well. This man had mustered an army and seized like ships in a harbour. Well, a ship. But come on. Just bury him first. And then 30 minutes later, after burying his cousin, a royal salute announced his claim to the throne. He's made it official. Unofficially. Depends where you're looking at it. Even though Basil Cave had significant armed presence in the harbour, he knew he did not have the authority to open fire without approval from the government. To prepare for all eventualities, he sent a telegram to the Foreign Office that evening stating, "Are we authorised in the event of all attempts at a peaceful solution proving useless, to fire on the palace from the men of war?" While waiting for a reply, Cave continued issuing ultimatums to Khalid, but to no avail. The next day, 2 more British warships entered the harbour, the HMS Raccoon and the HMS St George, the latter carrying Rear Admiral Harry Rawson, commander of the British fleet in the area. At the same time, Basil Cave received a telegraph stating, "You are authorised to adopt whatever measures you may consider necessary and will be supported in your action by Her Majesty's government. Do not, however, attempt to take any action which you're uncertain of being able to accomplish successfully." He got the green light. Then the final ultimatum was issued to Khalid on the 26th of August, demanding that he left the palace by 9 AM the next day. That night, Cave also demanded that all military boats leave the harbour in preparation for war. At 8 AM the next morning, only 1 hour before the ultimatum expired, Khalid sent a reply to Cave stating, "We have no intention of hauling down our flag, and we do not believe you would open fire on us." My man, Khalid just said no balls to the British Empire. Cave then replied in the true British stiff upper lip, diplomatic style, stating that he had no desire to fire upon the palace, but in quotes, "But unless you do as you're told, we shall certainly do so." Unbelievably based. At 9 AM on the 26th of August, the order was given for the British ships to begin the bombardment of the palace. almost instantly destroying an Arab 12-pounder, and by 9:02 the majority of Khalid's artillery had been destroyed and the palace's wooden structure began to collapse and catch on fire, with 3,000 defenders still inside. During the bombardment, the HHS Glasgow fired at the St George vessel. It was quickly mogged and sunk. The harbour was that shallow that the mast still stuck out, and the survivors raised a British flag to show that they surrendered. It is also around this time that Khalid has said to have escaped through a back exit, leaving his servants, slaves and fighters to defend the palace alone. He couldn't even last 2 minutes. But what can you expect? He poisoned his own family. By 9:40 AM, the shelling of the palace had stopped, the Sultan's flag pulled down, and the shortest war in history had officially ended after only 38 to 45 minutes. Now, I'll only say 38 to 45 minutes because for some reason we have the times, but it's debated. I don't know why it's debated. Bark for me, Khalid bros. The British controlled the town and the palace, and by the same afternoon, Hamoud bin Mohammed, an Arab favourite to the British, had been installed as Sultan. However, his powers were reduced. Overall, the British fired 500 shells, 4,100 machine gun rounds, and 1,000 rifle rounds. Unfortunately, even for such a short war, the casualty rate was quite high, with around 500 Khalid fighters being killed or wounded, mainly due to the British bombardment and also because of a fire starting in the palace, which just made the situation 10 times worse. On the British side, only one petty officer was injured, but he made a full recovery in hospital. With Khalid out of the way and Hamoud in charge, the British were finally back in charge of the island and were able to recontinue their job of fighting slavery in the region, and the supporters of Khalid were forced to pay 300,000 rupees in reparation, or 3.4 million in God Save the King money. As for Khalid, he managed to escape with a small group of loyal supporters to the local German consulate. Despite repeated calls from the British for his extradition, he was smuggled out of the country on October the 2nd by the German Navy and taken to modern-day Tanzania. It is not until the British forces invaded East Africa in 1916 that Khalid was finally captured in 1917 and was taken to St Helena for exile. After serving time, he was later allowed to return to East Africa, where he died in 1927 under British surveillance. So, for murdering his cousin, causing a war, and the death of around 500 people, and costing his people millions in reparations, he got 11 years in jail. So, my followers, what have we learned today? If the British say they're going to shoot you, you better fucking believe them.